some things that big brands do to research and make sure that these launches go off without a hitch, even if you're working on either like a limited team or a limited timeline. So yeah, this is me. I have a few friends that have told me that this picture looks like I'm gonna steal your lunch money, which I promise I will not. But I am a former high school music teacher, so you may detect a little bit of teacher voice in me. I apologize. It really hammers into you when you're a high school teacher to have this type of cadence. So, and then after being a high school teacher, I became a community manager, and I currently work at Teachable. I've been there for 4 years, and throughout the time that I've been there, I've taken their community from a Facebook group that had about 8,000 members when I started and 40,000 members by the time we migrated over, into a community that was on a totally owned platform where we completely revamped our community experience and what the strategy was. So that's sort of the experience that I'm drawing from and that I'm basing this framework off of. And outside of that, I also do some blogging and consulting around community management as well. So today we're going to be covering sort of like the why you should, why you shouldn't start an online community. And I'm very boldly calling this a bigger vision for community. So I think right now is a big moment for community, and there's a lot of space to be claimed for really seeing the true potential and pushing beyond that kind of like surface level idea of community and using community as a really strong brand tool. So that's something I'm very passionate about and we'll be talking about today. And then I'm going to be giving you some really tactical how advice, sort of what I'm calling a 5-step framework to launch a community the right way, quote unquote. There are no right and wrong ways, but I'm giving my theory here. And I've said as an entrepreneur, but this again could really work for a community manager that's working on a limited timeline, or if you're about to start a new job as a community manager and you want to come in with a framework that you pitch to your team. So there's a lot of applications to a framework like this. And I should probably say also, I've given this presentation a few times in different communities, and I'm really excited to give this one today because you guys are actually all community people. So this is an exciting presentation for me to give, but also probably I'm like, ooh, what do they think about this? Because I know you guys have expertise of your own, so please chime in with your thoughts. So something I always like to address at the start of a presentation like this is what I mean when I say community. So community has a broader meaning for people in culture, and that's totally fine. We're not going to abandon those meanings. So obviously, when we say community, we can be talking about our neighborhood community, or, you know, a lot of you guys are semi-neighbors of mine in New York. We can be talking about a religious community, or maybe you're part of a library reading group or something like that. And I think we take a lot of intuitive wisdom from those types of experiences that is totally worth drawing into how we look at community. However, when I talk about community in this presentation, I'm really trying to zone in on the tactical of a particular special space that you're creating for your most engaged members to gather and interact. And this is really talking about community as a program that you set up for a brand or another type of experience. So that's what I mean when I talk about this. I'm not just talking about audience in general, and I'm not talking about sort of the broader cultural application of community. But please feel free to draw in your own experiences. And yeah, I didn't add this slide for this presentation in particular. I always have this slide in here. Community is having a moment, and I love to use this tweet from Mac to prove it. I think that, to me, it's very heartening to see just how quickly the ecosystem of software that fuels community is growing. It shows me that people see value in this and that they're investing in creating tools that can power communities. And that's an exciting thing to see happening in the space. And then I just added this. Max said, community isn't having a moment, it's having a decade. So let the record be officially amended. We are in this for the long haul, folks. But since we are having this sort of moment in the sun as community professionals, I think it's always important to zone in on the reasons why we do this and kind of like put some added strategy behind what we're talking about versus just sort of like riding along with a zeitgeist. And it can be tough to thread that needle. So I'll pause here and ask that you guys go ahead and type into the chat just like a quick description of the business that you're either looking to start an online community for or that you're already starting for. And I'll pop that open so that I can see too. Chat, there we go. So go ahead and let me know. Max says, I know that guy. It would be bad if you didn't. Let me know just quickly, like, you know, I'm the community manager for a brand, or I'm looking to start something up as an entrepreneur. So I know how to sort of cater the examples that I give throughout this presentation. Oh, don't leave me hanging on my high five here, guys. Oh, podcast engagement company seeking deeper audience engagement. Yeah, I love that. And I'll let you guys keep popping these in. It really will help me give more specific examples as we go. So let's talk about some of the benefits to starting a community. And I think that some of these may already be very intuitive. Like I've listed relationships here, but I don't really have to tell anyone that relationships are a benefit of community. That's something that we all know. It's sort of the tip of the iceberg, the thing that's right up at the forefront. It's beneficial to make relationships with people that are in your audience. It helps you learn more about them. It helps you develop better things for them. It helps you grow your business, get more ideas, and it helps them stick around for longer. But I want to key in on some of the more sort of under the surface reasons why community can be such a powerful tool for a brand. One that I care a lot about is this idea of retention and success. And I've put even between launches, but you could sub out launches for promotional events or something like that. And what I mean here is that a lot of businesses ride on this sort of steady stream of income, and then they have these big promotional pushes that bring in a lot of income at once, whether that's, you know, launching a new online course. In my world of Teachable, we see this a lot where people have maybe one big promotional push of a new course each quarter or something like that. But this holds true with big brands too, right? We have big promotional events, things like, you know, Black Friday or a big summit or something like that, that brings in a lot of new customers. And then we have all this time in between those bigger pushes where we want to keep giving people value. And this can mean different things for different businesses. For example, your business could be something that you're offering something that takes a while to achieve. What, like in the example of somebody mentioned they have a podcasting business. I imagine it takes a while to start a podcast, and community is a great way to start giving people value before they achieve some sort of outcome or in between these big moments where you're pushing your product. Another thing I really like to mention is that community is an experimental content pipeline. It's fundamentally a content channel. There's so much talk and so much content-based programs that happen in communities. And what's really cool about community is that it gives you a chance to test your most innovative content ideas really in real time and see what you want to codify further. And it also gives you all of these different little pieces of not quite formalized content, but things that are maybe like an hour of work away from being an awesome blog post. For example, pulling, if you have a discussion in your community that's about a certain topic, it's like such low-hanging fruit to take that and turn it into content that feeds these different arms of your business, like whether you have social media or a newsletter and things like that. And then I've also put here, your audience probably already wants it. So if you don't have a community, you can easily do a little bit of sort of market research on this just by typing in the topic that your business is centering around into like the Facebook search bar, filtering for groups. You'll probably see that there are already some communities that are popping up around your niche, but they may not have sort of the strategy or the intent put behind them that can make them really soar. So this is a really good opportunity to start to claim some of that space and provide a better opportunity in your own niche. And shout out to anybody who watches The Bachelor or The Bachelorette or Bachelor in Paradise. I've put in this little "in it for the wrong reasons," which if you watch these shows, you know, comes up all the time. So there are really no wrong reasons, but there are a couple sort of heavy hitters that I always see people bringing up that I want to pump the brakes on starting communities to address really sort of short-term goals. So I think that I hear a lot of people saying, I want to start a community because I want to add like a bonus content to my business. I feel like I'm not delivering enough value and I want to sort of put this on top and have something else to list as my offering. I always caution against this just because community is super high effort. So if this is the thing that drives you to start a community, it's probably not the right sort of effort reward ratio. If you're just looking to add bonus content, there's tons of more like low-hanging fruit things that you can do, just like workbooks or evergreen content that you can provide to your audience. And same thing goes for sort of top of funnel content. I hear a lot of people that want to just like bring in new customers using community. And again, unless it's like your primary number one focus and you're willing to put tons and tons of time into that, it tends to not be the easiest way to achieve that goal. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work in some cases. But it's something I always like to caution, especially entrepreneurs on, because bandwidth tends to be limited. I also love to put this idea of sort of stopgap goals. I think it's really common, for example, for software companies to start a community to try to, easily address like quick support questions. But then a few months in, as they start to grow, they develop an actual help desk and they start to hire customer service people and they start to build out a knowledge base, and then they're stuck kind of holding these dual experiences. So try to think a little bit down the road for what you might offer 6 months, a year down in the future, and try to avoid making your community feel like this catch-all for things that are kind of holes that you need to plug in your business. It's both going to lead to confusion down the road, and also it kind of keeps you from realizing the bigger vision for your community that's probably already available to you, like giving a space to genuinely discuss and make connections around the niche that you're in. And I should really put a Twitter link to where I first heard this term community washing, but I just love this idea of don't take the community label and try to use it to slap it onto this idea of audience building. I think that there's tons and tons of companies that are using the community terminology these days, and I think it's going to become easier and easier for consumers to start to notice when companies mean it. And it can lead to people being really jaded when you say, we have a community, but they notice that it's not coming from a really genuine place. So yeah, are you ready? Are you ready to start a community? Hopefully, even if some of these boxes are not checked off, maybe I can get you there throughout the course of this presentation. But I think communities are a really good fit if your audience already loves your work. You have people that are interested in what you're doing, and you have this sort of bird's eye view where you can see they're all trying to achieve something, and you are aware of the shared experience that they have, but right now they're going through it alone. So in the case of the community that I run at Teachable, all of our members are trying to build a business online using online courses and coaching. And we know that, and we know that we can plug them into each other and help them have a better experience, help them find partnerships, or help them learn from the best practices that their peers have already defined. but they don't have a way to plug into those people. Another thing that might be like a checkbox for feeling ready is you're wanting to kind of centralize your experience for content. So maybe you have stuff that's all over the place, like you have a workshop series that you're running, you're doing one-on-one connects with people, and you want to sort of bundle it together under one sort of area where people can gather and access all of these different perks that feels like it's under a cohesive program that belongs to your brand. And then this last one, you got the time. And this is the one that I'm hoping to help you check off here by helping you identify the things that are important to focus on and what's maybe not so important to focus on. So if you know that launching a community can be like launching a new product and you're really ready to nurture it as you go, then you are ready to go. And we're going to dive into the framework. But first, I want to talk about a bolder approach to community. So I've alluded a few times through this presentation to this idea that community is having this big moment. And that means that there's a lot of tossing around of community terminology and people sort of like latching on to this idea of we're community first. And I think that there's a few ways to really put your money where your mouth is when you want to invest in community. And one is transcending the forum. So a lot of people, when they think community, they may just think about a place to chat. And to me, I really like to think of community as a big cohesive program where there may be a lot of features that plug into it that are all about connecting people and helping them succeed under one niche. And you're seeing it in action right now with Community Club, who's hosting all of these different types of events like workshops and live podcast recordings and AMAs. It's not just a place to go in and chat. Ultimately, once you get hooked, that can be one of the primary things that communities do is fill in this sense of kind of like social belonging. But it's important to offer more than just here's a new place where you can chat. I think it's also really important to take up this ethos of going beyond engagement for engagement's sake. So shifting our focus away from sort of like needlessly ramping up the chatter or the volume of discussion that takes place, and really thinking about what the impact of connecting people is for them, for your business. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about those goals as we go forward. And I think it's also really important to give both your members and your content status. So giving your best members opportunities to shine, whether that means giving them the opportunity to speak in front of the community, like I'm lucky to do right now, or whether that's giving them a chance to run a subgroup, really helping elevate them and give them a high five for what they contribute. And making sure that the content, the amazing content that gets created in your community doesn't die there, that it gets a new life, whether it's bundled into a blog or whether you're featuring people on social media, using it to inform your newsletter. Make sure that you don't kind of let that low-hanging fruit go to waste. And a few sample use cases of this, which may be obvious to people that are in ComStore, but I think a lot of times we focus on one but not the other. These are some of the really common ways that I've seen people using community. A place of shared practice. So for businesses that really center around skill building, so like learning how to make a podcast, or I've seen this with learning to paint or build an instrument. That would be cool, but I meant learning to play an instrument. In these cases, community can be a great place to kind of like practice, get feedback, share a little project that you're working on, and just like learn together. The other use case that I've seen more and more is this kind of top tier access community. So if you're somebody where your brand really centers around a person, so the person is the brand, and you want to have a way where people can get sort of top tier access to that person and their knowledge, a community can be a good way to scale that type of like inner circle consultancy. So I've seen it with people that have, like people like Pat Flynn, who does Smart Passive Income, has a kind of top tier community where people can sort of have like a mastermind group with him. And then the other thing that I really like to put into play at Teachable is this sort of like real-time workspace idea. So the idea of creating like a virtual co-working space for your members. This can really go nicely hand in hand with a synchronous experience, like people who are listening to the same podcast or they're working through an online challenge together. And if one of these applies to you, go ahead and type in the chat which one of these things you're working on building. And yeah, I'll pause before we go into the framework to see if there are questions. Oh, thank you guys for popping these context about your business into the chat. We are a career change company. Yep, that's awesome. Ooh, functional beverage industry. Okay, that's super cool. I want to learn more about that. I've been seeing all of these non-alcoholic drinks popping up too. Community for SaaS founders, awesome. Katrine, Noelle, will you accept this rose? Absolutely, yes. Alrighty, I love to see that I have another Bachelor watcher, proud or secret, in the chat. Curious about affinity communities, hobbyist communities, in other words, communities that don't have a skill or business outcome. Adam, can you tell me more about what you're kind of looking to parse out with hobbyist communities? Like what would differ there? Happy to weigh in. So yeah, we've made it to the tactical portion of this, which is this 5-step process for launching a community. And I think it's worth mentioning that any sort of like finite process, there's something kind of ridiculous about putting something that's really big into a 5-step process. And I know that, 6 steps to completely change your life and find your soulmate. 5 steps to launch a community. It's a big project, but what I'm looking to do here is kind of define some of the biggest categories of things that you'll have to do and give some advice on how you can do them without letting the project kind of stretch on into infinity, which I know from experience community projects can do. I've spent in my time at Teachable at times like whole quarters or 6-month periods of time working on ideating a new community strategy. And it's something that you can really, like, the sky's the limit for how much work you can do before you launch a community. But looking back on what I did, I know that there are certain things that I did that were more impactful than others. And that's what I want to share, because I see that so many people who are launching communities, they already know I can't just wing it. This is going to be an in-depth process, but I don't know what to focus on. And, I don't want this to take a ridiculous amount of time, or I have a really small team. So I want to help you figure out, the things that matter here. And you can sort of plug in extra stuff if you deem necessary. So, and I'll just go back and say, oops. I gave you a little sneak preview. If you want to take a screenshot of any element of this presentation, this is probably the slide that I would screenshot, because this is the whole process, but I'm happy to go back to anything at the end. So the first step is setting goals. And I always like to say that goal setting is different with community, because I think we have this tendency as people to think, because there's an evident outcome from connecting with others, I can skip setting goals for this because it's so intuitive what I'm getting out of this. And I want to always encourage people to be really clear about what the goals are for their community, both for their business and for their members. And what this does is it helps you decide what to work on. It's not about saying what is a good and what is a bad desired outcome from a community, there's all sorts of goals that can be totally valid for a community. It's about putting some boundaries to the scope of your project so that you can focus on the right things and make those tough decisions where you're like prioritizing one thing over another thing. So whenever I do a community project, I like to make sure that the goals I set are kind of in two columns. One is like, what is this going to look like in the community? So what's sort of the boots on the ground outcome that I want to see? And how do I hypothesize that's going to impact this business? So for example, I might say, in my mind, a successful community is going to have people discussing, I guess I'll give you a real example for Teachable. In my mind, my community is going to have people discussing strategies for building their online course. I think for my members, that's going to help them connect with one another and learn strategies instead of spending all this time reinventing the wheel. So that's great. That's my sort of what happens in the community side of it. But then I have to take it a step further and say, I'm going to hypothesize that people who learn faster how to successfully launch an online business are probably not going to get frustrated and churn from Teachable. So I'm going to suspect that this outcome in my community is going to impact the lifespan of our customers and reduce churn. So that's sort of the connection that you're making. And it's important that the business goal is something that you already track, something that you already care about, and that you don't have to sort of convince people is worthwhile. And then I've alluded to this a little bit, but I think it's really important with community projects to set anti-goals. And when I say anti-goal, I don't mean it's the opposite of what you want to see happen. So it's not saying I don't want to see people being mean or talking about politics or whatever it is. It's about identifying things that are out of scope. So saying, although it's great for people to get support, I'm not explicitly setting up this community as a support community for my software. That would be an anti-goal that would help you bring some clarity to what you end up working on. And I've alluded to this as well, but this idea of stopgap goals, so like plugging in holes of your business that you don't ultimately intend to solve with community, or like using community like a catch-all for different parts of your business. So yeah, that's step one, setting goals. And setting goals is also great because it helps you sort of outline in your mind what's really going to happen, how this is going to look, and what's going to be successful. And then the second step is validating your instincts. And I could sort of call this entire bucket like research. And when I did this for Teachable, I did a bunch of research. And that included things like auditing our past community and doing a bunch of surveys. And you can always plug in more forms of research to make sure that you're on the right track. But I'm suggesting one particular type of research, which is user interviews or discovery calls. So speaking to 5 or 10 people who may use your community actually like on the phone and getting to know them. And I think it's important to vary your interviewees, like how engaged they are, whether they're like people that always open your newsletters or who have, reached out to you asking for a specific feature, like people who are really engaged and people who are not so engaged. So you can understand how you can serve this broad range of your members. And when you're validating, you really want to ask them questions that help you prove or disprove the things that you've decided you want to include. So ask them what programs they're interested in. Like, would you come to webinars if we were to have a monthly workshop, or if we were to have a AMA session? Would you find that useful? And dig into what elements they would need to be there in order to actually come. So like, is there a particular time of day that we would offer this at that you would come to it? Does it need to be text-based? Does it need to be video-based? All those kinds of things. And I also always like to ask what communities they're already part of and why. And I like to get really broad with this. So I'll say like, Are you part of any groups around your hobbies? Do you maybe take part in like a weekly skating club at your local ice rink? Why are you doing these things? What draws you to a community, and how can this space become part of your routine and really help you out? And yeah, I'll just point out this step does double duty, because when you loop in your members early on and talk to them face to face about the project you're building a support squad. You're building people who will kind of root for you and who will talk up the project that you're building. And then later on, you can go back and say, we built it this way because our members asked for us to build it in this particular way. Because when you launch, you will have people who come out of the woodwork and say, I wish you built it in this way, or I wish that you offered X thing. And it's always nice to know that you've crossed those T's and dotted those I's. I almost said crossed those I's and dotted those T's. Alrighty, so that's step 2. Step 3, often missed and overlooked, but really important, setting a content cadence for your community. And I'll explain what I mean by a showstopper. But I think it's really important when you're launching a new community to recognize that you're going to have to fan the flames. You're going to have to do some legwork to make sure that people start talking there. And obviously, I've already mentioned we're not looking for engagement's sake, but we do need people to participate in order for it to matter. So the thing that I think is important to start with is a sort of reliable, anticipated cadence where people know, even if it's early days in this community and it's not like super noisy right now, I can rely on there being a post from the community leader that I can engage with today. Like if they open it up, they need to be rewarded with something new. And this can vary a little bit depending on the platform that you use. So for example, I see a lot less of this kind of like engagement question style being used in Slack communities. And I think the reason why is that the anticipated prompt is sort of built into how the community is set up, right? So if you have on your sidebar things like the community club has, where it's, jobs, questions, you're sort of already prompting people and giving them license to participate in different ways. And that's what this is. So if you're working with more of a kind of like static forum, you may need to just fan the flames and give people permission to chime in on a particular subject. And then beyond that, because I've talked about going beyond a forum, I like to include a lot of different content types. And there's a lot of reasons for this that I can go into, but I think the most important thing to think about is just people aren't necessarily going to open up the community to chat. They will open up the community if you're providing a super high value event series or an AMA, or you're giving them a space where they can work on product ideation, things that they can't get anywhere else. They will open up the community to get those things. And then once they're already there, then they'll chat with each other. And when I say showstopper, I really mean choosing one sort of like high value, high effort content feature that your members want, and making sure that you launch your community with that feature so that they have a reason to open it up. Remember, people are vulnerable. People have various levels of being early adapters. They don't want to go into a party and be the first person talking, but this showstopper is kind of like putting a snack table in your party. It's like giving people something to do, right? So you might say like, come to my meeting, there'll be pizza. And then people are like, oh, I'm showing up for the pizza, but they actually participate in the meeting. That's the relationship here. Okay, and then choosing softwares and tools and platforms that are right for you. I'm a big proponent that there is no one kind of like best objective right platform, but there's usually one that's a best fit for your project. And as I think another software community manager was joking at one point, like, what's better, MailChimp or ConvertKit is like the most commonly asked question in software communities, because people love to sort of like pit platforms against each other. And I always say, you know, they're different platforms or they have different features. And so what I like to do, and this is very type A of me, but I would just like to make a spreadsheet. So I'll write along the top all of the features that I want to have included, and I'll think about the types of things that my audience needs and expects based on their experience with big social platforms like Facebook groups. So they probably want to be able to comment. They probably want threaded comments. They probably want to be able to react to stuff. And then I'll think about the features that I need to run the content that I've decided to include. So I may need to have a way to share a live video, or I may need to have a way to host a native blog inside my community. And then I'll just compare like 3 or 5 platforms against those features. And I also like to mark them must have, nice to have, etc. And again, I did not add this slide for this presentation in particularly, but if you don't know about it, this community ecosystem map is a fantastic tool to get started choosing software. And this may even be an outdated version of it because, as Mac always points out, this thing is growing so much every single day. This is a booming space. And then we're at the last step, which is activating members. So I really love David Spinks from CMX's 10 at a time idea. So this is just the idea that if you have 200 or 1,000 people that you ultimately want to bring in your community, I think that it can feel good to sort of open the floodgates and let everyone in at once. But counterintuitively, growing slowly can actually make it easier for you to scale the community over time. And this is just a reality of how human beings work. We're not able to really hold a ton of new information about other people all at once. You cannot get to know 1,000 people all at once. You can get to know 10 or 20 or 30. And as a community builder, it's really important to get to know the members that are coming in as they join. This is what lets you spark engagement in a meaningful way. This is what lets you start conversations that matter and tag people into the right stuff, make connections, figure out people's genius and what they can contribute. And it can be tough to reverse engineer that if you're launching a huge community. I'm also a big fan of this method that Bridget Sauer from Atlassian taught me. It's called the flywheel. And it's just the idea that you sort of create this feedback loop of creating high quality posts. And I'll explain how this works. So basically what you can do is, we all know about sort of like starting engagement questions with like an open-ended question. So in the case of our podcast community, sorry, I'm leaning so heavily on your example here. Perhaps you'd say something like, you know, what is your method for outlining your podcast production schedule? This might be a really silly question for your use case, but an open-ended question, something that could be taken in a lot of different directions. And then people will respond to that. And some of the comments will be quite basic, and some of them will be revelatory because people are really interesting and smart, and they'll take the direction in different ways. And when you start to read into the comments, I think a lot of people get this first step of asking open-ended questions, but the real follow-through is seeing, oh, this person has this really interesting approach they took to this, and then tapping on them to share more. So what I will actually do is email that person and say, hey, I saw your comment on my post. I think what you said was really interesting, and I think it would be valuable if you were to share more. Would you be willing to create a new post where you explain this in more detail? And then I'll actually outline what I want to see. So I'll say, you know, if you can go into these 3 points, I think that the community would be really interested. And then I'll ask them to end the post with a question. So I'll say something like, if it feels natural, if there's a question you can think of that would invite further conversation on this topic, be great if you end the post with that. And I did this a lot when I had first started my community, just to help kind of pick people out of the crowd, tap them on the shoulder, and give them license to share what I had learned they were passionate and interested in. So it can be scary at first. It feels like you're sort of puppet mastering, but it's quite genuine. People like to feel recognized, that you've seen what they're smart about and asked them to post. If they were feeling super confident and habituated in the community, they might have done so anyways. And the beautiful thing about this strategy is that when you do things like this, you will see other people following suit with similar types of high quality content that you didn't even ask to, because they start to learn that it's welcome in the community. And yep, I always like to say, know that this process really takes time. Activating members and engaging them is this really ongoing process of experimentation. And it feels like magic because there's strategy behind the curtain. So I always like to remind people that even in the most sort of like magical, organic, social interactions, it's usually happening to some degree because somebody that's there is very good at socializing and making people feel included, and they're using skills to do that. And I think that as a community manager, you can kind of be that person who brings the magic and brings out the best in people, and it is both organic and strategic at all at once. Yeah, so that's all the content that there is. But just a little bit of follow-up. These are some ways that you can reach me. I'm on Twitter. You're always welcome to email me. And I blog at noeleflowers.com. And the framework that I just shared, I have a editable Google Docs template that you can use if you want to play around with this, that sort of formats out for you some of the things I talked about, like setting goals that connect member outcomes to business outcomes, or like comparing softwares. So if you want to start with that, you can get that framework here at this bit.ly link. And that is it. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pop open the chat and we shall Q&A.